Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're diving
It
into,
is a good one.
it is,
Yeah,
it's Animal Farm
it really is.
by George Orwell, published way back in 1945, but
So relevant.
oh, so relevant. It's a satirical novella
hmm
that I think just continuously resonates with every generation that reads it.
Yeah, it's a book that I think stays with you.
Absolutely.
Deceptively simple on the surface, but like with these layers of meaning about power and revolution and the human condition.
Yeah, we're going to explore that whole journey from the initial spark of rebellion to that chilling final scene. Um, Animal Farm, for those unfamiliar, follows the animals of Manor Farm as they overthrow their human farmer, Mr. Jones, dreaming of an equal and free society. But as we'll see, their utopia quickly devolves into a totalitarian regime, just as brutal and exploitative as the one they escaped.
And that's where the meat of the story lies. Not just in the plot itself, but in how Orwell dissects the themes of corrupt leadership and manipulation and the dangers of blind obedience.
Right, so let's start at the beginning. Chapter 1 introduces us to the misery of life under Mr. Jones, the neglectful, often drunk farmer. The animals are overworked, mistreated, and essentially living in a state of perpetual servitude.
And into this bleak existence steps old Major, the wise old pig, and his speech outlining the animal's woes and calling for rebellion is really the catalyst for everything that follows.
It's interesting, though, because even at this early stage, there are hints of the divisions and power struggles to come. Remember that bit about the cat voting on both sides of the rats are comrades debate?
Ah, yes, that always makes me chuckle, foreshadowing the kind of slippery, self-serving behavior that we'll see later on, particularly from certain pigs.
And then old Major dies, leaving behind a void and a legacy of revolutionary ideas. 3 younger pigs emerge as leaders: Snowball, Napoleon, and Squealer, each with their own vision for Animal Farm.
And it's fascinating to see how their contrasting personalities and ideologies set the stage for the conflicts that erupt later on. Snowball, with his idealism and grand plans, represents a more intellectual and perhaps naive approach to revolution.
While Napoleon, from the very beginning, seems more interested in power for its own sake, he's cunning, ruthless, and willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals.
And let's not forget Squealer, with his silver tongue and knack for propaganda. He becomes Napoleon's mouthpiece, twisting the truth and manipulating the other animals to maintain control. A classic example of how those in power can weaponize language to serve their own agendas.
The rebellion itself is pretty dramatic. Fueled by old Major's teachings and their own resentment, the animals rise up and drive Jones off the farm. It's a moment of pure liberation for them, full of hope and the promise of a better future.
It's a genuinely joyous time for the animals. Remember, they create the 7 commandments of animalism, principles based on equality and shared labor. They're working hard, but they're working for themselves. And there's a sense of camaraderie and purpose that they've never experienced before.
But even in this early stage of the revolution, there are hints of trouble brewing. Molly the mare, who's more concerned with ribbons and sugar than with grand ideals, decides to abandon the farm and return to the comfort of human society.
Molly's departure is significant because it foreshadows the challenges that lie ahead. It raises the question, can a revolution based on equality truly accommodate those who prioritize individual comfort over collective good?
And it's not long before the cracks in the animals' unity begin to widen. The Battle of the Cowshed, where the humans try to retake the farm, becomes a turning point in the power dynamics between Snowball and Napoleon.
Yes, Snowball emerges as a brilliant strategist. But we later learn that Napoleon has been secretly training those puppies, turning them into his own personal guard dogs. Chilling foreshadowing of the violence and intimidation he's willing to use to consolidate his power.
And this all culminates in Chapter 5, with the infamous windmill debate. On the surface, it's about whether or not to build a windmill to modernize the farm. But on a deeper level, it represents a clash of ideologies.
Exactly. Snowball envisions a future where technology can alleviate the animals' burdens and improve their lives. Napoleon, however, sees the windmill as a threat to his control, a symbol of progress that he wants to stifle.
And of course, he uses those very dogs to chase Snowball off the farm, seizing absolute power and setting the stage for the totalitarian regime that's to come. The expulsion of Snowball marks a dark turn in the story.
From this point on, fear and repression become the norm. Napoleon systematically dismantles the principles of animalism, rewrites history to suit his narrative, and eliminates any potential threat to his authority. This is where Orwell's genius shines through. He shows us how easily a revolution can be hijacked by those who crave power, and how propaganda and fear can be used to control the masses.
One of the most chilling examples of this is the Hens Rebellion in Chapter 7. They resist giving up their eggs, and Napoleon responds with brutal force, starving them into submission and executing those who dare to defy him.
It's a horrifying display of how totalitarian regimes crush dissent. And what's even more disturbing is how Squealer manipulates the other animals, convincing them that the hens were enemies of the state and that their deaths were necessary for the good of Animal Farm.
It's like that famous line, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The pigs are slowly morphing into the very humans they overthrew, twisting the language of revolution to justify their own tyranny.
It's a brilliant satire of how those in power will often use the very rhetoric of liberation to suppress it, how they'll manipulate language and logic to serve their own ends.
And as we move into chapters 8 and 9, we see the pig's grip on power tightening. Animal Farm becomes a republic, but of course Napoleon is the only candidate for president. The pigs move into the farmhouse, start sleeping in beds, drinking alcohol, and engaging in trade with the neighboring human farmers.
This gradual shift in their behavior is so cleverly done by Orwell. He shows us how power corrupts incrementally, how those who start with good intentions can slowly become the very tyrants they sought to overthrow.
And what about the other animals? They're working harder than ever, but their lives haven't really improved. The pigs are enjoying the fruits of their labor while the rest are struggling to survive. It's a classic example of how those at the top of the hierarchy will often exploit those below them, even while claiming to act in their best interest.
And then we have poor Boxer, the workhorse. His dedication is admirable, his loyalty unwavering, but he's ultimately betrayed by the very system he believes in.
His motto, "I will work harder," takes on a tragic dimension as he literally works himself to death, only to be sold to the glue factory by the pigs.
It's one of the most heartbreaking moments in the book, and it speaks volumes about the callous disregard for individual lives that often accompanies totalitarian regimes. Even the most loyal and hardworking are disposable when those in power see them as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded.
And of course, Squealer is there to spin the narrative, telling the animals that Boxer died peacefully in a hospital, and that the pigs were honoring his memory.
Propaganda at its finest, twisting the truth to maintain control and quell any potential unrest.
It's fascinating how at this point, even the 7 commandments have been subtly altered to justify the pigs' actions. The original principles of animalism have been completely eroded, replaced by a system that serves only the interests of the elite few.
And as we head into the final chapter, we'll see just how complete this transformation has become, how the pigs have fully embraced the very evils they once rebelled against.
This is where it gets really interesting and perhaps even more relevant to our own world today. But we'll have to pick up that thread in part 2, so stay tuned.
Sounds good.
All right.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how Animal Farm isn't just a historical allegory, but a cautionary tale that resonates across time.
Right, those themes of manipulation and abuse of power, they feel eerily familiar even today, don't they? It's like Orwell had a crystal ball and saw what was coming.
He was certainly attuned to the dangers of totalitarian regimes, having witnessed the rise of fascism and Stalinism in his own lifetime. But the brilliance of Animal Farm lies in its universality. It speaks to the human tendency towards greed, corruption, and the abuse of power, regardless of the specific political context.
So let's dive into that final chapter, chapter 10, where we see the full extent of the pig's transformation. Years have passed since the rebellion, and on the surface, Animal Farm seems prosperous. But beneath that facade, something far more sinister is brewing.
It's like watching a slow-motion car crash. The pigs are now walking upright, wearing clothes, drinking whiskey, and even trading with the neighboring human farmers. Everything the animals fought for, all those principles of animalism have been completely abandoned.
And it's not just their behavior that's changed, is it? Even their physical appearance has become more human-like. Remember that chilling line? The creatures outside look from pig to man and from man to pig and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which.
That image is so powerful, so evocative of the complete blurring of lines between oppressor and oppressed. The pigs have become the very embodiment of the human tyranny they once sought to overthrow.
It's like that whole cycle of revolution and corruption has come full circle, hasn't it? The animals started out with these noble ideals of equality and freedom, but they ended up right back where they started, under the rule of a new set of tyrants.
And what's particularly tragic is that the other animals seem to have accepted their fate. They're still working hard, but there's no longer that sense of hope or camaraderie that existed in the early days of the rebellion.
Remember how the sheep used to bleat? 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Well, now they've been brainwashed into chanting, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. It's a stark illustration of how easily propaganda can be used to manipulate and control the masses.
It's like they've been completely stripped of their critical thinking abilities, reduced to mindless followers of the pigs regime.
And what about the ending? That scene where the pigs are playing cards with the neighboring farmers, toasting to the prosperity of Manor Farm. It's just chilling, isn't it?
It's a masterstroke by Orwell. He doesn't need to spell out the message explicitly. The image itself speaks volumes about the complete betrayal of the animals' revolution.
It's like the pigs are celebrating their victory over not just Mr. Jones, but over the very animals they claim to be liberating. They've become indistinguishable from the human oppressors they once despised.
And what's even more disturbing is that the other animals watching from outside seem unable to comprehend what's happening. They've been so thoroughly conditioned, so bombarded with propaganda that they can no longer recognize the truth.
It leaves you with this sense of unease, this feeling that the cycle of oppression could repeat itself at any moment. And that's the real power of Animal Farm, isn't it? It's not just a story about talking animals in a farm. It's a timeless warning about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of critical thinking.
Exactly. Orwell is urging us to be vigilant, to question authority, and to never take our freedoms for granted. Because as Animal Farm so vividly demonstrates, revolutions can fail, ideals can be corrupted, and even the most well-intentioned leaders can become tyrants.
So how do we apply these lessons from Animal Farm to our own lives and our own world? I mean, we see examples of power abuses and manipulation happening all around us, in politics, in the media, even in our personal relationships.
That's a great question, and one that I think Orwell would want us to grapple with. It's easy to feel overwhelmed or powerless in the face of such widespread injustice. But I think Animal Farm offers a few key takeaways that we can apply to our own lives.
Okay, let's unpack that. What are some specific things we can do as individuals to resist these forces and protect ourselves from falling into the same traps as the animals on Animal Farm?
Well, firstly, I think it's crucial to be informed, to educate ourselves about the issues that matter to us. We need to seek out multiple perspectives, to question the narratives that we're being fed, and to develop our own critical thinking skills.
So it's not just about passively consuming information, but actively engaging with it, analyzing it, and forming our own opinions.
Exactly, and that includes being willing to challenge our own assumptions and biases. We all have them, and it's important to be aware of how they might be shaping our perceptions of the world.
I think that's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in our own echo chambers, surrounded by people who agree with us. But that can lead to a very narrow and distorted view of reality. We need to be willing to step outside of our comfort zones and engage with different perspectives, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Absolutely, and it's not just about consuming information. It's also about being active participants in our communities and our societies. We need to engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views, to find common ground where we can, and to advocate for the changes we want to see.
So it's about using our voices however we can, to speak out against injustice and to hold those in power accountable.
Precisely. Whether it's through writing, speaking, voting, protesting, or simply having those difficult conversations with friends and family, we all have a role to play in shaping the world around us.
And I think that brings us back to one of the most important lessons of Animal Farm, the power of collective action. The animals were only able to overthrow Mr. Jones because they worked together, united by their shared desire for a better life.
That's right. Individually, they were weak and vulnerable. But together, they were able to achieve something extraordinary. And the same principle applies today. When we come together, when we raise our voices in unison, we can make a real difference. We can challenge those in power and demand a more just and equitable world for all.
Welcome back to Books and Bytes. We've been exploring the themes of power, corruption, and revolution in Animal Farm. And I think it's just fascinating how relevant these themes still are today.
Absolutely. Even though it was written, over 70 years ago, it just feels incredibly timely. It's a stark reminder that the human capacity for tyranny and manipulation transcends time and place.
Yeah. You know, one thing that struck me as we were discussing the pig's transformation is just how subtle and gradual it was. It wasn't like they woke up one day and decided to become like human-like dictators. It was this slow, insidious process of eroding the principles of animalism bit by bit.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so chilling, isn't it? The pigs didn't seize power through brute force alone. They used a combination of manipulation and propaganda and fear to gradually wear down the other animals' resistance.
Yeah, it's like they understood that the best way to control people is to make them complicit in their own oppression.
Exactly. And they did that by constantly shifting the narrative, redefining what was acceptable and unacceptable, and creating an atmosphere of fear where anyone who dared to question the pig's authority was labeled an enemy of the state.
And it's amazing how Orwell uses language to illustrate this process. Remember how the Seven Commandments were subtly altered over time to justify the pig's actions? Like that principle of all animals are equal eventually became all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Oh, that's one of the most famous lines in the book. And it perfectly captures the hypocrisy and the absurdity of totalitarian regimes. They often use the very language of freedom and equality to mask their own oppression.
Right, it's like they're saying, sure, we believe in equality, but only for those who are already in power.
Precisely. And it's a tactic that's still used today, isn't it? We see politicians and leaders paying lip service to democratic values while simultaneously eroding those very values through their actions and policies.
It's a reminder that we can't just take words at face value. We need to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the underlying power dynamics at play.
Absolutely. And we need to be willing to call out hypocrisy and double standards wherever we see them. Because as Animal Farm shows us, silence in the face of injustice can be just as dangerous as active complicity.
You know, another aspect of the book that I find particularly relevant today is the role of propaganda and misinformation. Squealer is such a brilliant character, the ultimate spin doctor, twisting the truth and manipulating the animal's perceptions to serve the pig's interests.
He's a master of doublespeak, using language to obfuscate rather than to clarify. And he understands the power of repetition, constantly hammering home the pig's message until the other animals start to believe it, even if it contradicts their own lived experience.
Right, it's like that old saying, if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth.
And in the age of social media where information spreads so rapidly and unchecked, I think this message is more relevant than ever. You know, we're constantly bombarded with different narratives, competing versions of reality, and it can be difficult to discern what's true and what's not.
So it's more important than ever to develop our critical thinking skills,
Mhm.
to question the sources of our information, and to be wary of anyone who claims to have a monopoly on the truth.
Exactly. We need to be skeptical consumers of information, to cross-check facts, and to be willing to challenge our own biases. Because as Animal Farm shows us, propaganda can be incredibly effective, especially when it taps into our fears and prejudices.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the many layers of meaning and enduring relevance of Animal Farm. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on what this book has to teach us about the human condition and the challenges we face today.
You know, for me, Animal Farm is ultimately a story about the fragility of hope and the enduring power of the human spirit. Yes, it's a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of tyranny and the importance of vigilance, but it's also a testament to the human capacity for resistance, for dreaming of a better world, and for fighting for justice, even in the face of overwhelming odds.
That's beautiful. And I think it's a fitting reminder that even though the animals on Animal Farm ultimately failed to achieve their utopia, their struggle wasn't in vain. Their story continues to inspire us to fight for a more just and equitable world, to challenge those in power, and to never give up hope for a better future.
And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with that thought. Thank you for joining us on Books and Bytes, and we hope this deep dive into Animal Farm has been insightful and thought-provoking.
Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, and keep questioning.